Karishma Chagani Hamilton, and I am here in Montego Bay, Jamaica with the one and only Tech Beach Retreat. It is 2022 and we are back with a bang. I'm sitting here with Richie Etwaru from Guyana, originally. And he just blew our minds on the main stage. So Richie, tell us about your brand.
So Mobius is the name of the company, M-O-B-E-U-S. And it's called Mobius because it's Morpheus, Obi-Wan, and Zeus. Now that's really geeky.
Wow.
That's really geeky. I'm not sure our branding people will ever tell the story that way. But the reason why it was set up that way is because the tech that you saw this morning is ubiquitous. Right? And we see a world, and I see a world where 20 years from now, hopefully 20 years from now or 30 years from now, you got grandchildren, or 40 years from now, you have grandchildren. You know, you're gonna go into a playroom and the entire room is gonna be screens that the kids could engage with. And you're gonna wanna go for a walk and you're gonna say, hey, Mobius, can you babysit the kids for me for 15 minutes? And content will just engage on the screen and the kids will play with it. So tech will be so embedded in our lives that we will have to trust it. We'll have to trust it more than we trust electricity. We'll have to trust it more than we trust Wi-Fi. In some ways, we're gonna have to trust it as how we trust in God, because it's going to be so embedded, all ambient around us. So I thought if we could arc a brand that sort of feels like it's here to protect, feels like it's here for good, feels like it's here for the more omnious outcome of humanity, as opposed to something that sounds like, I don't know, Shopify Lee or one of those things that sounds too techy. I felt like 30, 40 years out, this sounds like a brand that I would trust to babysit my grandchildren. So that's why the name is there. Now there's a whole bunch of really smart people that worked on it and stuff. And the butterfly is because we see a metamorphosis of tech. And
how did you get started on this path in the first place, especially coming out of this region?
So, you know, when you get to America, it's startling. Right? It's like seeing chocolate for the first time. It's like, wow. And, you know, I remember clearly the first time I landed in the US from Guyana, the first thing I was really surprised by was the amount of limousines that were there. Because when you come out the airport, it's just like limousines left and right. And I figured, so I'd watch Coming to America. I figured maybe Eddie Murphy has a limousine and you maybe there's 3 more in the country. But you come out of JFK and there's just like limos outside. So, you know, a series of things like that really, for me, it startled me to go, wait a second, what am I missing? I don't understand this entire construct of how could so much wealth be deployed in such a small group of people? What are these economic markets that I don't understand? Coming from Guyana, you know, you had one brand of peanut butter, right? You go into a store in the US, there's like 12 brands, you don't even know what to choose from. So I got really curious, started to really read a lot and research a lot, and every time I see something that I didn't understand, I kept going, what am I missing? How do I not understand what's going on there? Tech actually just ended up becoming my vocation. So I'm a bit of a math geek. And you know, if you're a math geek, what are you going to do? You're either going to go work in the science lab, work on some secret government project, or you're going to get into tech. So getting into tech was interesting. And then tech is kind of limitless, right? This is why I think for a region like the Caribbean, tech is the promise, because the barrier to entry is pretty low. You just need a computer, internet connection, and you can start doing what you want to do. So I got into tech, and tech is one of those things where you can invent. And you can create something new. You can break something that was once impossible and make it possible. And early on in my career, the first time I did something that was impossible, the brain does something where it starts to generate a reckless disregard for impossible. Right?
That's so well put.
It's almost like a dopamine hit of, wait a second, I thought that thing was impossible before, and now here I am. And so what else do I think that's impossible that could be possible? Now that's terrible for personal relationships. You know, it's just not constructive. You're a pain in the butt at a social party.
This is not for a dating app. This is not a commercial for a dating app.
Like, this doesn't do well. But in the corporate context, you know, businesses are about bets and courage. Great businesses, at least, are about bets and courage. So I got into this because when I landed in the U.S., coming out of Guyana, the arc of what was achievable was so much longer than I thought, that I just went into this kind of like 30-year research
spiral.
Yes. Failure, starting, learning, bumping into things, making the same mistake multiple times and learning the same lesson over and over. It's been a journey like that, but it's a growth journey. And as I was saying earlier to a couple of the folks here at Tech Beach, the entrepreneurial spirit has that fight in it, right? And the immigrant spirit has that fight in it.
Oh yeah.
Because startups are hard. Building businesses are hard. You can't try starting a company. Like, you can't try because it's hard and you're going to fail. So if you're trying, the minute you fail, you're done.
You just have to do it.
You have to commit to it. You have to tell your cousins, you know what? I'm going to do it. Because now you're hanging yourself by the tongue.
Completely. When you tell your family that's it, you have to do it.
Right? So that's kind of how I got started in this.
Okay. You know, you've said a lot and I have very many questions. I'm going to try to lick them out one at a time. So you said something about failing and failing multiple times and learning the same lesson over and over. Yeah. If you think back to one of your biggest failures and one of the biggest lessons that has taught you and brought you as far as you are on your journey, what would that be? Yeah,
I think, so I was building a company called humanity.co. And the thesis there was that the human species could become a 3-income species. So right now we're a 2-income species. There's all sorts of secondary income, but primary income is labor and intellectual property.
Right.
And God didn't give them to us, right? Labor came from labor laws, IP came from the statute of monopolies, right? And so we have laws that says if you work, you shall get paid, or if you think, your thoughts are yours. So I had a thesis that your data should be yours.
Right.
And your data could become that 3rd income stream if you think about all the ad tech business models and how data is being used to monetize folks. And it was a great idea. I built a massive brand around it for the 31st human right. Okay, and petitioned the United Nations to add a 31st human right to the 30 that we have, took it to the World Economic Forum.
Disruptive.
Okay, and even had the audacity to define the language that human data is human property, human inherent property. And you can get so lost in an idea that you can make a 50 to 100 year mistake.
Wow.
The idea was about 50 to 100 years too early. Now, I believe with all of my heart that in some time in the next 50 to 100 years, human data will be human property, because the data that comes off of our body, what we look at, what we touch, what we like, what we swipe, what we buy, where we go, all of that is information that producers use to generate want for products and services that they make.
Right.
And that value exchange is just not balanced anymore. And on the imbalance curve that I see, there's a fine line between mass personalization at scale and micro manipulation at scale.
I want you to say that one more time.
Yeah, there's a fine line between mass personalization at scale, which is what the ad tech folks would argue, that mass personalization at scale, don't worry, I'm going to give you an ad that you'll love.
Yes.
But it shares an intellectual boundary with micro manipulation at scale, which is maybe you didn't need that red sweater that I made you buy.
Exactly.
Right? And so I got so caught up in the promise of the goodness of it that I missed by about 50 to 100 years. Now, that's not the first time I'd missed by 50 to 100 years. I'd missed on another project before, and that lesson was important because I failed at a bigger scale. So sometimes you could fail, and you fail on a small scale. And so you kind of brush off the mistakes. You know, it's like if you stump your toe, you're like, okay, I'm still gonna walk there.
Right.
Okay, but if I walk there and I broke a leg, I'm not walking back there.
Right.
Right? So sometimes you will make the same mistakes, but on a bigger scale. And the scale is what will teach you the lesson. So when I made that 50 to 100 year mistake on humanity.co, I thought, okay, I've got to reorient my intent here. Am I trying to be right, or am I trying to get it right? And I want it to be right.
You know, you have a way with words, and you have a way with explaining yourself with such grandeur, but it's the most simple fact. And I think that's really cool. When you were on stage this morning, you were talking about something in your brain that tells you about the orientation of your body and how it can throw your system off.
Yep.
I want you to speak a little bit, please, about this app that you've built, how all of that works. You also gave the explanation of evolution and how we started off as apes and then we became erect and then we went right back down to the computer, and that you're trying to alleviate the pressure on people's necks.
Yeah.
So could you kind of break it down for us without the fact that we have visuals here?
Right.
You know, paint us that picture.
So the technology that Krishma is talking about is a technology that allows you to engage with a screen with your hands and your body. So to be able to reach into a screen and grab something, or to be able to look around the screen or zoom into something. So just like Jobs introduced to the world, you know, touch, this is touchless, right? And the competitive framework for that technology is that as soon as you see it, you go, why do I need a headset? Right? Because if you could see this perception of depth and engage with it, immediately everyone goes, well, why is there a headset?
Right.
What I was talking about on stage this morning is a part of what you have to do when you build a business. You have to study the long-term implications of the products and services that you build.
Yes.
For every feature that you put into an app, there are people that are going to use it for good, and there are people that are going to use it for bad. For every architecture that you build on a platform, there are people that are going to use it for good, people that's going to use it for bad. Twitter, Facebook, hello. Right? So what I wanted to do was I wanted to understand whether this kind of natural interaction with the computer had the same impact that the headset had on the human being. Now the headset is awkward and it's kind of silly and it's probably not going to work, but the thing that it really has standing in its way is if you use it too long, somewhere between 25 to 50% of humans get nauseous.
Yes.
And so I thought, okay, if this technology that we have, which is to interact naturally, gets better, how do I make sure that people don't get nauseous? So we started to look at it to really understand what's happening, and what we figured out. So the complexity is a little bit more than an accelerometer. So I was talking about the accelerometer, like a phone has an accelerometer.
Yes, yes.
It has more to do with the cochlea and the ears and all the bones and stuff like that. But the face and the body has a natural accelerometer, right? So if you lean forward, your body knows that you're leaning forward. If you lean back, the body knows. The problem with the headsets is that the scene around you changes to lean you forward or lean you back, but you didn't move your body.
Right.
So your body's accelerometer is going, hey, why do I feel like I'm leaning forward? Because I definitely did not lean forward. And so that insight was really instrumental for the confidence of the business, because we thought, okay, if we don't have that problem, then we definitely have something that the hardware companies have as a problem that we have as a solution.
Correct. Yep.
And when you engage with the computer naturally like that, when you lean in, your body is leaning in. And so your accelerometer is expecting the screen to actually change. As a matter of fact, and I don't have the science behind this to argue it, I would argue that when I lean in to look at a screen and it doesn't respond, that's throwing off my accelerometer.
Yeah.
Right? This happens to me a lot when I work in a car. When you're working in a car, your body is moving around a lot in the back of a car, you get a little nauseous. So those were the things that I was talking about. Technology has really, really great promise for mankind, but it also has side effects.
Yeah.
And there was a time when if you built an app, 200 people will use it, 200,000 people will use it, 20 million people would use it. You could build an app today that could impact 4 billion people's lives. If I told you tomorrow that we're going to ship a t-shirt that 4 billion people are going to wear, you might say, you know what, I want to sleep in that t-shirt a couple of nights first and wash it to make sure it actually stays before I ship it, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing with tech. There's an accountability that comes with that mass scale where you've got to think through the edge cases.
Where do you see this technology playing out the most, or where would you like to see it the most?
Education. The ability to interact with information in a completely different way changes the aperture of comprehension that we have as human beings. Okay, so let's dissect that for a second. When I reference the aperture of comprehension, I'm talking about how much we can understand. Now, we've been told that the average human understands about 20% what the other person is saying. Right?
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
And 80% of that is body language, by the way. It's not the actual language that you say. Now, that's a little startling.
It is very startling, because I feel like I'm zoned in here.
But if you look at it from what I like to call big time, so a lot of times I like to look at things on a longitudinal chart that's a couple of million years wide. Because if you look at the world from a couple of million years wide, you're going to see trends that you can't see over 100 years or over 10 years. If you look at it a couple of 100 million years, we have to take religion out of this conversation. We have to assume that we did come from some sort of Homo sapien evolution. At one point, we just grunted at each other.
Yeah.
And that was all the communication aperture we had. I got to move, right?
Right, exactly.
Now we have language, we have telephones, we have email, we have visuals. What this technology does is it introduces more information that can travel through that substrate of the screen. And so that gives you more comprehension. When I was pointing in that little gray area on the chart to say, here's where corporations work and here's where startups work, there is no better way to make that point.
Yes.
Right? Think about how hard that point hit everybody in the room. And I talked about you can no longer build what customers want, you have to build what they wish for.
Wish for, yeah.
That ended up being the thing that was tweeted the most.
Yes.
And I believe it's because of the moment that I took people in while I said what I said.
Yeah.
So if you've got a broadened aperture of comprehension, well, education is just the place for that, right? Because that's where comprehension is needed the most.
Exactly.
That's where you can train broader amounts of people under the pedagogy that we have. So that's one area. Obviously, there are much more commercially attractive areas for the technology. For example, sales and business development. I mean, what's sales and business development today? You go out, you pitch a client, you hit share on your PowerPoint slide, the whole thing's a slide, you're in a little box in the corner somewhere. The aperture of comprehension gets narrower than if you were there in real life. But what we looked at today on stage, you could argue that what I was able to transfer through that experience might not be better than real life, but it was kind of close.
Pretty damn close.
Right? So that's why I'm excited about education, because that's where comprehension suffers the most.